Gospel of Mark is the shortest of the four Gospels. It's the earliest. And Mark, each one of the Gospels, as I've said repeatedly, and hopefully not to belabor it, but each one of the four Gospels is like looking at a building from four different sides, and you get a different view. But when you go around and look at the building from all four sides, then you have a pretty complete picture of it. Mark's Gospel pictures Jesus primarily from the perspective that's described in Isaiah 52:13 through chapter 53, the fourth of the servant songs. And in fact, that particular passage, there's every verse of that except one is quoted somewhere in the New Testament, and most of those verses appear more than one time. Very influential passage as the apostles were looking back between the time that Christ died and rose and ascended. Between then and Pentecost, they were searching the Scriptures, trying to and scratching their heads. How did we miss this? That it was supposed to be like this. And one of the places that they looked more than anywhere else and found answers more than anywhere else was Isaiah 52, verse 13 through the rest of chapter 53. The chapter divisions in the Bible were added many years later in the Middle Ages. And some places you kind of wonder why they divided it right there. But anyway, it does help us to be able to find the same place when we read the Scripture aloud. Actually, it was the printing press that helped to develop Bibles that people could have, and also the need for us to be able to find the same place. Mark's Gospel is structured around two confessions of faith. One made by Peter when Jesus gives him the pop quiz, the midterm exam in chapter 8. Who do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter gets the answer right. And he says, you're the Christ, which is a Jewish confession. The other confession is at the cross. Roman centurion. Surely this man was the Son of God. The guy that was in charge of crucifying Jesus, saw how Jesus died. Surely he was the Son of God. Tradition has it that Mark got his material for the gospel from Simon Peter, along around AD 64, along in there, as Peter was in prison, and perhaps Mark was in prison also. Got his material from Simon Peter. Mark is the same one as John Mark that you read about in the book of Acts, the one that went on the first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas and turned around and went back after they just had got started good. God was not finished with him. You can mess up real bad, and it'll take you anyway. The oldest manuscript that we have of Mark's Gospel ends abruptly. In fact, it's sort of the original scroll may have not been finished, or else it was torn off. Perhaps John Mark was put to death too. We just really don't know. The main dynamic here in this gospel is something called the messianic secret. I'm saying this up front because we're going to encounter it just in a minute. Jesus in Mark's gospel does not go around proclaiming, I am the Son of God. In John's gospel that we're studying Wednesday nights, he's saying, I am, everywhere. Mark's gospel, he's very quiet about it. The point is, he's demonstrating who he is and trusting in God to work in people's hearts to see whether they recognize him or not. And the tension, the suspense, the curiosity builds up through the gospel till Jesus in chapter 8 asks the disciples, well, what are people saying about me? Who do they say that I am? And you get all the different answers. The real question is, who has, by the Spirit of God, put together the things Jesus is doing and the things Jesus is saying with, he must be the Christ. All right. Having said that, Jesus is preaching throughout Galilee, a comprehensive ministry marked primarily by casting out demons. The point is, the kingdom of darkness is being driven out and taken captive as a new conqueror comes in to take over. The king is here. He preached in their synagogues, verse 39, throughout all Galilee, cast out demons. And there came a leper to him, beseeching, begging him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, if thou wilt, or literally, if it is your will, you are able to make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, or it is my will, could be rendered. Be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately, there's that word again, the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. And he, Jesus, straightly charged him. Real strong words here. Could be even rendered, sometimes that word's used for rebuke. It's a real strong word. Straightly charged him, and forthwith, or immediately, or straightway sent him away. And says to him, see thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded, for a testimony unto them. But he went out and began to publish it much, and to blaze abroad, set the town on fire. Blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but was outside or without in desert places, and they were coming to him from every quarter. This is a little snapshot, about 5 verses. Interestingly, we have more verse material devoted to Jesus commanding the man to be quiet than we do devoted to the description of the wonderful miracle that happened. And one of the reasons that we don't have details about the miracles is because Mark didn't know. If we could explain it, it would be explainable. One of the characteristics of the miraculous is that we can't explain it. It is beyond our ability to understand. Here comes a leper to Jesus. Leprosy in biblical times was the most dreaded of diseases. It was dreaded the way AIDS has been dreaded in our world over the last 30, 40 years. I can remember when that first became a plague of epidemic proportions. And in fact, I probably conducted one of the first funerals in this state for a person that died of AIDS back about 1982 or 3. A guy that had actually been a classmate of mine in high school, had been in the Navy, ended up on the West Coast in San Francisco and in a lifestyle that was not right. And his mother lived right there near the church and was a member of the church. In fact, that boy's name was on the church roll. And he came home for his last few months. He was as emaciated as a Holocaust survivor in one of those concentration camps. And just an awful, awful thing. And he was maybe 29, 28 years old, something like that. Terrible thing. Leprosy was on par with that in biblical times. People were afraid of leprosy and those that had it. It was the most dreaded disease that would just show up on a person. Sometimes it would start out as a little scaly place, maybe on the wrist or the forearm, and it would spread. And as it spread, it got deeper, and it'd work its way down through the skin, through the muscles, down to the bone. And eat away at a person's bone, and finally the different members of a person's body would just sort of fall off. No human remedy for leprosy. Leprosy appears throughout the Bible, and it gives us just a very clear and powerful picture of how sin works in a human life. The difference is not everybody's infected with leprosy, but we're all infected with sin. And sin may first show itself in our lives in some small, unseen way that's not very conspicuous. But left untreated, it spreads through that person's life until your life literally falls apart. It will destroy you. Leprosy ultimately would utterly kill you. Sin ultimately will utterly kill you, not just for this life, but for all eternity. Not that you cease to exist. There's some groups that hope that that's true, but it's not. But you'll spend eternity. If you're not delivered from sin, you'll spend eternity dying for eternity in a place that's variously described as outer darkness, where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. Described by the term Hades or hell. Described as a lake of fire that burns with brimstone forever and ever. Eternal death is how the Apostle Paul often referred to it. There came a leper to Jesus. Just like sin, a person with leprosy was cut off from fellowship with the people of God. You couldn't go to the tabernacle during the wilderness wanderings. You couldn't go to the temple during Jesus' day. You were cut off from corporate worship with the people of God. You were cut off from society. You had to live outside camp during the wilderness wanderings. You had to live outside town in a place designated for the unclean. If you came into town for some reason, or if anybody got close to you, first of all, you had to wear your head all shaggy, your hair all shaggy, if you still had it. You had to wear clothes that were torn, because it was a grievous thing. And you had to wear a cloth that hung down over your nose and mouth to keep your breath from being on people. By the way, till flu season's over, let's not sing "Breathe on Me." And if anybody got close, you had to cry out, "Unclean, unclean, get away from me. You don't want to catch this." Sin cuts you off from being able to worship God. Cuts you off from being able to fellowship with the people of God. Person that's got sin working in their life and controlling them in their life, if they do come to church, they're going to find something wrong with it, or find something wrong with somebody, or find something wrong with, something wrong with that old preacher, I remember first time something like that got back to me, and I was about 27, 28, and I thought, I ain't old. Sin does the same thing to us, though. Leprosy. In a physical sense, sin does it in a spiritual sense. And utterly destroys your life. Just like leprosy, sin has no human remedy. Now, there's 2 whole chapters in the book of Leviticus devoted to leprosy. Chapter 13 has to do with principles and points to look for in diagnosing it. And see, leprosy came in lots of different forms. It didn't always look just like sin. And so chapter 13 of Leviticus it gives principles and ways for the priests to identify it. Chapter 14 of Leviticus gives rituals and ceremonies and sacrifices to be done in the hope of a person being cleansed. It even gives situations where the person is not able to come to the priest and the priest has to go to them. You know what they do? Sometimes they burn the house down. Because everything that person has touched, every dish they've eaten out of, everybody that's coming, everything is unclean. Which brings up something else. Sin makes you unclean. Interestingly, in the Bible, whenever a person was recovered from leprosy, it was always a miracle. No human remedy. Always a miracle. Few times. Time or two in the Old Testament. Remember Naaman the Syrian in 2 Kings 5? And Elisha didn't even come to the door, told his servant, go tell Naaman, who was the second most powerful man in the world of that day. He was the head, he was the commander-in-chief of all the armies of the king of Syria. Came up with all his entourage and his horses and his chariots and his men and all this stuff and brought all these garments and all this stuff to pay to buy a cleansing. By the way, he had only heard about that just from a little slave girl. You know, there was that heathen man believed. And lots of local people wouldn't even go across the street. Yeah. Go wash in the dirty old Jordan River 7 times, not hardly knee deep, you know. You'll be clean. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? There's only one way, you see, that he could be cleansed of the leprosy. And it wasn't that God had commanded that everybody do this. But Elisha gave him a test of his faith. Do you really trust enough to do something that humbles you? And to do something that makes you maybe not look like the big hero that might have shot the arrow that struck King Ahab between the joints of his armor and killed him in his chariot that day. That was the story that went around. And he fussed and he fumed, and his slaves came, called him Father. If the man of God had bid thee do some great thing, would you not have done it? By all means he would have done it. He could have gone home and bragged about it. How much rather than when he saith to thee, wash and be clean. Then went he down, dipped himself 7 times, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again. Read it, 2 Kings 5. It didn't just make him like he was before as a 45-year-old. His flesh came again like the flesh of a little baby. Made him new. We'll look at that in detail one day now that I've kind of whetted your appetite and got you doing some, preview study and stuff. Leprosy, an awful thing. Always a miracle when it happened. The rituals that are given in chapter 14 of Leviticus are in anticipation that the priests and everybody will be praying for this guy to get cleansed. And by the way, they always speak of leprosy as being cleansed, not cured. You ain't going to be cured of sin in this life. Sin is going to always reach out its tentacles try to get hold of you. It's going to always try to sprout back in your heart and get control. See, when you became a Christian, God didn't root the sin nature out of you. He laid the axe to the root of the tree, but all that root system's still in you. And He planted a new nature in it. It's like having two flowers planted in the same flower pot. Try that sometime. One of them will dominate over the other one. They may not either one be real healthy, but one will dominate the other. You have two natures in you. And one of them is going to dominate over the other once you become a Christian. And you know which one will dominate? The one you feed. The one you pay attention to. Yeah. Right. Sure will. An old Indian chief back in the 1800s won to the Lord over in Texas or Oklahoma, somewhere right over in there, by a missionary. And they were sitting in the chief's teepee one afternoon after he became a Christian and was talking about now, about being victorious in your Christian life. And they were talking about two natures and stuff. And the missionary said, well, now, which one of those natures is dominant in your life? And the old chief said, well, it's sort of like when my two dogs get to fighting. The one that wins is the one I say sicking to. The nature that wins in your life is the one you say sicking to. The one you want. You make the decision, really. You're not going to be cured. You can be cleansed. You'll be cured when between here and heaven. Once you leave this place, when you come into the presence of the one who died and rose again, when you know as you're known, when we'll be like Him, for we see Him as He is, 1 John 3:2, then you'll be delivered from the presence, even the possibility maybe, of sin. Well, here comes this leper to Jesus. It's a picture of a lost person coming to Christ. 5 things quickly I want us to see. There is a horrible condition. Now, we're not told how advanced this leprosy was in this man. But at any stage it was bad enough, because it always led to the same ending. Sin always leads to the same ending. Might not look as bad, in your case. It's just as deadly. It's just as deadly. You can be shot just as dead with a .22 as you can with a cannon. Just as deadly. Whatever way. Poison doesn't have to be a big old horse pill. His condition was undeniable. Everybody knew he was a leper. Everybody knows deep down in their heart that we got a sin problem. We can try to gloss it over, And society will tell us, well, we just give them some education. Education not going to fix the human heart. Mm-mm. I've been educated way beyond my intelligence, and it wouldn't fix what's the matter inside. Wouldn't. I'm in favor of education. But education's not the cure-all. Religion won't fix you either. Religion is an outward approach trying to change your habits behaviorally in hopes of getting your heart to change. Doesn't work that way. In fact, Jesus demonstrates that the heart issues in the outward behavior. We'll see it in a minute. Undeniable that this man had leprosy. He was unclean. Also, he was unworthy of being cleansed. Here he comes to the Son of God. Notice that he doesn't say, now I've been a good guy and I give money to the synagogue, and before I come down with this leprosy, I taught Sunday school or something. Of course, they didn't have Sunday school, but he doesn't talk about any of the religious stuff he did because it has no bearing on his condition. Nothing about him deserves any help. And he's in an unchangeable situation because no human remedy, no doctor can fix this. We see a horrible condition. We see a hopeful confession. He comes to Jesus. Notice, he comes beseeching. By the way, you ever use that word beseech? That's an old English word. He was begging him. Begging him. Begging him. Begging him. I'll tell you what. If folks hadn't been so deceived about how serious their sin really is, we wouldn't have any empty pews. We'd have people interrupting the service like they did on Pentecost, saying, "What shall we do?" Because they're cut to the heart. Begging him. He was earnest. He was desperate even. He was humble. He came begging and kneeling down. When the last time you asked somebody, Mr. Car Dealer, please sell me that cheap? You ever try? I might have to try that. Nothing else I've done's work. They see me coming. Whatever it is, it's for sale. I told you one time about going to Fayetteville, me and my buddy Vic. Went down there to get a guitar amplifier in my 1970 Mustang that didn't have much of a back seat. And we went in the music store. And when we walked in the store, there wasn't no other customers in there. And that man came and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Well, looking for a guitar amplifier." And he said, "Well, what kind you want?" I said, "I don't know, but I want the biggest one you got." I have never seen a man in a store move that fast. He was scurrying around and he wheeled out this big thing on wheels and had a separate head, for it. And just 4 12-inch speakers and the 48-inch cabinet and all this stuff. And he's telling me all this stuff. And 15 minutes later, was trying to see how I was going to get it in the back seat of that Mustang. Somehow or another, we got the back part of the back seat to lay down, and we had it sticking half out the little trunk and in there. And hit the road home. That man saw me coming. Here's a guy that was humble, down on his knees, begging. Man, if we just could do that today, or see that done, or experience that, or do it ourselves, can't expect somebody else to do it if we don't. If we got that much sensitivity about sin in our lives, what would happen in this country? Notice something else. He was earnest, he was humble, but he was confident. Look what he says to Jesus. He says, if it is your will, you can. He doesn't presume to tell Jesus, now it ought to be your will to fix my problem. He says if. He's leaving it up to Jesus. But if it's your will, you can make me clean. You are able to make me clean. It could even be rendered, you are strong enough to make me clean. His confidence. Well, somehow he's heard about all the demons Jesus has been casting out in just a verse before this. the word has gotten around. And he has come to Jesus for the first time with real hope. And he trusts. He has faith. God has put that faith in his heart upon hearing this. And he comes with a hopeful confession. Horrible condition, hopeful confession. And next, notice heartfelt compassion. Jesus moved with compassion. That's one of those sort of untranslatable treasures in the Greek New Testament. Literally, it's one word that we won't have a spelling test on it. It's pronounced splagnidzomai. Let me get it out. I'll take a running start. Splagnidzomai. You know what it means? It means Jesus' intestines churned. You ever see anything that does that to you? Jesus, when he saw human suffering, he knew what it went back to. It went back to, yea, hath God said, you shall not eat the fruit of every tree in the garden? Now that doesn't mean every time you suffer that you have personally done something wrong that caused it. But it's because we live in a contaminated world. Contaminated with our sin. And we've all got it, and we're all infected with it, and everything we touch has got it on it and in it. We're breathing it in. You know, a virus you catch on an airplane is going to be an airborne strain. And sin is everywhere. And it infects us in every way that anything can come into our heart. It has access to all the ways. Ear gate, eye gate, taste, touch, everything. Notice it says Jesus moved with compassion. Jesus' intestines churned. He's moved internally with the human suffering that goes back to sin. Notice he's moved internally. He's moved outwardly too. Let me read what it says there. Jesus moved with compassion, put out his hand and touched this guy. And this guy is required by the law of Moses. When anybody gets within like 10 yards of him, unclean, unclean, stay away. And here this man somehow felt like he could come to Jesus, and he's kneeling and begging. And Jesus moved in his heart and moved in his hand. By the way, if you really moved in your heart, it's going to move you in your hand. If we really moved inwardly, it's going to show outwardly, isn't it? Yeah. If we really care, we're not going to be content. You know, as James said, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding you don't give that person those things they need. If we really care about the suffering, we're going to do something to help them. By the way, that's how word got around who Jesus was. Because he's not going around, I am the king that's going to sit on the throne. He's just quietly doing stuff. And leaving it up to God to make the connection in people's hearts. And the word is getting around. There's a heartfelt compassion. There is a heavenly cleansing. Jesus put forth his hand and said, I will. Now, in English, it's not that clear. When I say I will go to town today, I'm basically saying I shall go to town. Or in the future, I'm going to go to town. When Jesus said I will, the word translated will is not about the future. It is my will for you to be clean. Like the will of God. It's that kind of thing when Jesus says that. I will this is another way. of getting at what Jesus was really saying. It is my will. Do you know that that's why Jesus came? The whole purpose in God sending His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. It's because of our suffering from our sin. That's the whole reason Jesus was here. But notice the leper, so humble, so earnest, though he's desperate, he gives Jesus an out if it's your will. You can cleanse me. And Jesus says, it is. Be clean. Now here it's not real clear whether Jesus is talking to the man. He might be talking to the leprosy. Because the leprosy obeys him and gets out of there. Soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed, packed its bags and left. Out the door. Didn't wait for the noon train. Gone. Soon as he spoke. Notice everything about Jesus involved in this cleansing. His heart moved, his hand moved, his mouth moved. Do you know that when you come to Christ, earnestly begging for Him to cleanse you, you have His undivided, total attention? That's amazing. All the resources of heaven are focused right on you. Just like you take a big old magnifying glass and focus the sun rays, you know. I used to get out the ant hill. Got that sin nature in me, you know. Yeah. We have a heavenly cleansing. Then this seems a little bit strange to us, why I talked about it before, but we have a holy command, verse 43 and 44. He strictly charged him. We don't use that word charge much in church. When we ordain somebody, when we lay hands on them and set them aside for the deaconship, to minister to people in the congregation who have special needs. There's a charge given to the candidate and a charge given to the church. When a person surrenders to the gospel ministry and a church calls them to be their pastor, we have an ordination service for that person. When they're publicly set forth, set apart for that work, to administer the ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper, to rightly divide the Word of God, to provide ministry to that particular congregation or any others that God leads them to down the road, that person's life is set apart. And you know, there shouldn't be any such thing as somebody's a preacher on the side. No, that's the main thing from then on. And everything else, wherever he leads, I'll go to him, you know. Everything becomes secondary, you know. And you give a charge to the candidate, you know. Usually comes from 1st or 2nd Timothy. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine, etc. That's what was used at me, in mine. Good script. And what that does is to make them aware of how serious this is. And Jesus straightly charged this man, this is serious, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Go to the priest. Offer those things, you know, from Leviticus 14. There's a reason for this. 2 reasons. One of which, maybe the priest will realize some notable miracles taking place. Maybe he'll get cleansed of what's in his heart too. The other thing is, this man is still marked as a leper, and until he goes and does the ritual stuff, he won't be allowed back in society or to go back and live at home. There's a process for it's a shame. But somebody's lived a sordid worldly life out there in the world, and they can come to church and be saved, or be saved out there and then come to church. Yeah. And that doesn't mean everybody's going to say, oh, goody, everything's wonderful now. There's a process. Takes some time. Not everybody's going to buy into that as being real right then. Jesus knows that He's really cleansed this man. But for the full effect of it, in this man's circle of influence, you got to have that man be able to re-enter society. There's a guy that Jesus ate dinner with, spent the day with, the week He was crucified, called Simon the Leper. He wasn't a leper anymore, but he was known for having had leprosy. And obviously Jesus had cleansed him at some point. I wonder if this man's name might have been Simon. We don't know. Not important. God knows. We have a holy command to do it, but don't. For one thing, Jesus is trusting that the Holy Spirit going to work in people's lives and they're going to make the connection. For another thing, people are flocking to Him. Final thing I see is a happy compulsion. So he went out and kept his mouth shut. Is that what it said? Went out, began to publish it much, and blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus couldn't go into town anymore. By the way, at the beginning of the story, here's a man that wasn't supposed to go into town. And he ends up that what he had, Jesus got. Couldn't go into town. There's a real sense in which Jesus takes our stuff upon Himself. Do you know that? Yeah. And people flocking to Jesus so much that he can't walk down the street anymore. So he stays out there in the desert, out in the countryside, and people are coming to Him right and left. Right and left. And here's a man, Jesus told him, and his heart was in the right place. And he loved Jesus, and he was thankful for all, but he just couldn't keep his mouth shut. Let me tell you something. When something like this happens to you, you just can't keep your mouth shut. That's a fact. If you can. And I've seen this a time or two. Guided somebody through the plan of salvation, Romans Road or something. And that, in the quietness of their home, they'd pray a sinner's prayer and ask Jesus into their heart. And I have seen this several times. Well, preacher, don't ask me to come up in the worship service. I really don't feel comfortable in crowds. I'm not going to be coming to church. I just want to go to heaven. Let me tell you something. If you don't want to be with the people of God a little bit down here, you don't want to be with them a whole lot up there. Why would you want to go spend eternity with Jesus if you don't want to spend any time with Him now? Doesn't make sense. Something wrong. And here's a man who could not keep quiet about what God had done in his life. And that is the full and final demonstration of his cleansing. He really was cleansed because he couldn't keep quiet about it. Now here's the question I have for you. Have you been cleansed from your sin? This man didn't wait for a private audience with Jesus. There's people all around. He didn't say, Jesus, I need to talk to you over here inside. No. He came right then, like he was, begging on his knees. That's how it has to be. He was fully decided that this is what he was going to do. How about you? You ever really and truly been that serious about getting cleansed from your sin? If you haven't before, you need to now. I'm here to help you if I can. Maybe there's somebody on your heart. Maybe you've been cleansed and there's somebody on your heart you want them to be cleansed. Before you go talk to them about Jesus, you need to come talk to Jesus about them. And if He's put them on your heart, you can be confident that He's already working on them. Yes. They might not act like it. They might not admit it. But He's at work preparing them. If you need to be cleansed, come on, get it. If you have been cleansed and know somebody else that needs it, come on, talk to Jesus about that. So they can have it too. As we stand and sing.